Oh look, they've tuned in.
Welcome to the video.
Imagine watching this.
Welcome to Billy's Backlog, a backlog he'll never get through. The series where I delve deep into my backlog across 2023.
They'll be doing this till 2024.
Let's watch.
No,
don't.
Subscribe.
Watch it.
Click off.
Click off.
Sub to Billy S.
You won't regret it.
Subscribe. You're in for a real treat today.
Games can be impactful. That's a statement I don't feel I need to say, but I'll say it again. Games can be impactful. Whether that's by giving marginalized groups a medium to express themselves, or a way of shining light on issues that plague real-world people, gaming as a medium is diverse, and the interactivity allows for developers to tackle themes in unique ways. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is perhaps the best video game in the medium to capture the realities of psychosis, but presenting the illness, in my opinion, in an approachable and understandable way. Mental illness is invisible to the naked eye, something that can only truly be described by those who go through it, so using the medium of gaming and framing Hellblade entirely from Senua's perspective on the world, we are able to get a glimpse into her mental state. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Welcome to Billy's Backlog. Today we're tackling Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, an action-adventure game developed by Ninja Theory, released back in 2017. It's currently on all available platforms, though I'm playing through PC Game Pass. So why was this game in my backlog? Naturally, I am drawn to any type of game that presents ancient mythology in a fun and unique way, and Hellblade's compact world detailing various facets of Norse mythology really fits that bill. But, as alluded to in the intro, I was mainly intrigued by the promise of a well-told story about mental illness. Back at the 2017 Game Awards, Melina Juergens won a Best Performance Award for her work as Senua, and I told myself, yeah, I'd like to see what that game's about someday, she seems cool. Now I've finally gotten around to it, what can I say? Well, you'll find out my personal thoughts later. First, let me introduce you to the gameplay. But be warned, this video contains spoilers for the entire game. If you have even a sparing desire to play this title, go in blind. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is an over-the-shoulder third-person adventure where we join Senua on a journey to the gates of Helheim. Her goal is quickly established as she seeks to save the soul of her deceased lover Dillion from the Norse underworld. As the game plays out, we learn more about what led Senua to this point, and the events surrounding her past, Dillion, and the nature of the forces she fights throughout the game. Gameplay is split into two very distinct sections: exploration, which makes up a majority of the game's runtime, and combat, where Senua is forced to draw her blade and fight the manifestations of hell itself. In exploration sequences, Senua must traverse through the environments, solving puzzles to progress. She can walk, run, climb ladders, cross beams, hop down small gaps, open doors, lower bridges, and in later levels, light torches to progress. Her movement tools are basically standard fare, and you'll be pleased to know there's no stamina system, meaning that Senua can run for as long as she likes, as long as you're not in a cutscene. Her main ability is her keen sense of focus. She is able to view the world in a different light, which can lead to various uses throughout the game. In exploration sequences, her focus can be used to solve puzzles, such as finding rune patterns in the environment to open up gates, or mending fractured structures by lining herself up in a specific spot to rebuild them. In a majority of levels, Senua will need to open special gates guarded by red runes, which can be dispelled by discovering these runes in the environment. These can be tricky puzzles, as you'll need to be observant or be standing in a specific spot to see them, but you'll know you're close when you're surrounded by various small glowing orange runes, as they only appear when you're in the right spot. In certain levels, progression is tied behind other mechanics, such as switching between dimensions, walking through archways to change something about the world, and other mind-bending solutions. You'll also come across rune rocks throughout most chapters of the game, which will allow Senua to recall a memory from the past from an old friend she met in the wilds, Druth. He taught her all about the Norse mythology of the Northmen and was unintentionally a driving factor in Senua's mission. The other form of gameplay is the combat, which locks you into a small combat arena and forces you to battle various creatures from hell. They start off incredibly simple and incredibly stunnable, but increase in danger and size as the game progresses. You have light and heavy attacks, light attacks being far more useful in the early game, while heavy attacks take center stage as you progress. You can dodge away from an enemy's attack, signified by a glint of white on the enemy's weapon, and while I never did this in my playthrough, you can also parry and block enemy attacks. I didn't actually know this, however, because the game doesn't give you any tooltips or tutorials at all. You'll only see the buttons for each ability by pausing the game. After a certain point, Senua gains the ability to store charge in an iron mirror on her person, which allows her to focus during battle. In this state, she slows down time, able to inflict multiple attacks on her opponents, and more often than not, finish the battle entirely before the effect ends. It can also be a viable healing strategy, as Senua will heal over time during battle, but she is human like the rest of us, and can only take so many hits before falling down. Sometimes you'll be able to get back up and keep fighting, albeit your attacks may be slower for a moment due to your injuries, but take enough damage, and you will go down.
Get up.
Continue the video.
Up. Continue the fight.
You have to beat this game or you can't review it.
What a waste.
Awful player.
Like the video.
Subscribe to Billy S.
80% of my viewers aren't subscribed, you know. Wake.
Combining these two gameplay styles, you've effectively already seen everything that Hellblade Senua Sacrifice brings to the table. The combat is extremely bare bones, and each battle feels less like a fight and more like a struggle to stay afloat in a world that wants Senua dead. From a narrative perspective, this actually makes sense, but I can't say I looked forward to fighting segments in-game, and I know this style of battle can turn away prospective players looking for something a little more engaging. The biggest offense is that, as far as I'm aware, you can't switch between targets in battle. You're locked onto one enemy until another tries to attack you, or until you either kill the enemy you're facing or hit the other enemy in the arena. It's frustrating as you get put into situations where you really can't do much against your opponents. At the very least, Senua's voices that accompany her journey will give you advice in battle, mentioning when she may need to focus or when an enemy is attacking from behind, but it's not a replacement for an actual lock-on mechanic, I'm afraid. Speaking of Senua's voices, however, they are also technically a mechanic in the game, so let's quickly discuss them. From moment zero, you're introduced to Senua's psychosis, which takes many forms, and one such are the many voices inside her head. She can hear them constantly, and as the player, we too must hear them. Some are mocking, some are helpful, all of them different facets and aspects of Senua's personality, but they are all ultimately a part of her. And in both battle and exploration, they act as a guide for the player, giving them hints as to where to go or what to do in specific puzzles. The psychosis comes from the fact that while they are important to listen to, they can be pessimistic as fuck. Some will try to turn Senua back from her journey, some will tell her to run, to flee, that she can't do this. It's a mindset I can relate to because it's the same thing that happens with depression. There's a voice in your head telling you you're not good enough, you don't deserve happiness, or sometimes even to live. And as the story progresses, we see Senua go through these moments in glimpses of her past. In the end, Senua can't get rid of those voices in her mind, so she must learn to cope and live with them, learn to block them out, and the player does the same. They can be very distracting at the start of the game, but as you progress and start to understand the game's mechanics, the voices become less and less important, more of a nuisance, like a fly you just can't swat, until you reach a point in the game where they actually vanish for a little while, but only briefly. When you reappear and the voices start talking to you again, you find you can ignore them. You're done with them, they just need to go away. But they'll always be a part of Senua, and learning to coexist with her psychosis instead of allowing it to weigh her down is a major theme of the game that, by its end, is fully realized. Now then, the story of Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is easily the main draw of the game, and I do want to discuss it, but if you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching. I won't go terribly in depth, but I will touch upon main plot points, levels, and locations. Act 1 takes place at the gates of Helheim, following Senua as she defeats two Norse gods, Surtr and Valravn, to obtain their marks that will allow her to progress to Hell. This part of the game is a nice non-linear segment that allows you to tackle each god in either order you want. I went after Surtr first and found myself in a more combat action heavy path, where you have to burn down marked gates to progress. To do this, you approach these fire sacrifice plinths, and when you focus on them, you summon flames of the past to burn the forest around you. It's then a race to the marked gate to beat the fires. Throughout this chapter, you'll receive guidance from Senua's old friend of the wilds, Druth, who passed away before the events of the game. His tales of Norse mythology are a partial motivator for Senua's journey, and you get to hear more about his backstory through the flames of Surtr. This culminates in one final fire sacrifice that causes Senua to actually burn away, revealing a memory of her past with Dillion, a promise she made to return to him. A promise that gives her the courage to take down Surtr in a fun boss fight. Combat, as I've said before, is the weaker side of the gameplay coin in Hellblade, but the boss battles are actually really enjoyable, as you're almost always pitted against a singular foe, and it's about reading their moves, using your focus abilities, and taking them down in a more crafted combat scenario. Once Surtr goes down, you're free to return to the gates of Helheim, and if you haven't already, you can head down Valravn's path. This was perhaps my favourite portion of the game, a bold claim I know, but Valravn focuses on illusions, able to warp the world around Senua, changing structures, forming paths, and more. He's always watching, and you have to follow his song of the forest to keep up with him, and thus find his illusions. The main gimmick are these series of archways that, when stepped through, will change the environment slightly, be it creating a hole in a wall, revealing a new path forwards, or in the case of a puzzle near the end, dispelling a series of fake talismans. It reminded me of an old Minecraft map called Dimension Jumper, where you'd have to hop between dimensions to solve puzzles, and look, I'm a sucker for this type of gameplay. It is pure puzzle, and there's only a sparse few combat encounters. I love it. As for the story, Senua's backstory is expanded upon, revealing she made a journey into the wilds due to the darkness plaguing her life. As the player and an observer, we know that the nature of her darkness is probably mental, relating to her psychosis, but Senua still has to go through her own realizations throughout the game, and here we see her misplace the blame of her darkness on Valravn. Valravn's boss fight is a step up from Surtr, in my opinion, being faster, more agile, and trickier to defeat than the other god, easily my favourite of the game's boss fights, and a great way to end Act 1 combat-wise. Combining the plot of Surtr's path and Valravn's path, we learn that Senua went into the wilds to tame her own darkness, where she almost succumbed to it, but a chance encounter with Druth allowed her to survive, though his days were sadly numbered. He shared with her stories of the Norsemen before passing, and upon returning to her village, Senua found it burned to the ground with Dillion's sacrifice to the Norse gods. And with Druth's tales fresh in her head, this kickstarts her journey. Act 2 is less combat-focused, taking place as Senua opens the gates to Helheim and begins her journey across the Helheim Bridge. Here we encounter, for the first time, the goddess of the Norse underworld and an absolutely terrifying figure, Hela, at the end of the bridge, leading into Helheim. Although her appearance was accidentally spoiled for me prior to her appearance in-game due to a rogue achievement proccing on Game Pass, maybe those should be tied to the end of cutscenes, not the beginning. Either way, Senua attempts to face down Hela, but her sword is shattered and she falls from the bridge overwhelmed. With her spirits destroyed, she receives a vicious head wound that she cauterizes before being shown a light, a vision of what she believes to be Dillion. This light leads her along the Helheim beaches towards a gnarled tree, where she gets a flashback to the time she met Dillion, revealing that she had been watching him train from afar, and he invites her to participate in the upcoming warrior trials. Which ties into the gameplay, as after the cutscene we find the ancient sword grammar embedded in the trunk of the tree, and to obtain it, Senua must complete 4 trials, each with their own unique gameplay twists. In my order, I took on the Burial Mound trial first, which forced Senua to delve into a dark labyrinth with nothing but a torch. It's a case of trial and error gameplay-wise, but narratively it's quite fulfilling, revealing that Senua was being abused by her father and his affirmations that she was cursed, leading to her threatening him at sword point, what a queen, before fleeing her home with Dillion. The second trial dumped me into a fetid swamp with a fairly simple puzzle needing to be solved to enter a nearby house, using the same gimmicks as Valravan's segment. But once inside, we have to find 3 rooms to open a gate while being pursued through a twisting maze by a flaming creature. This was genuinely terrifying and a standout moment in the game. But the story behind it is sadder still. Senua was able to predict a plague that overcame Dillion's town, and with some of the townsfolk blaming her, her psychosis, and her father's words at her being cursed, it all weighed down on her, with Dillion being the only person in her life to see through the curse and the pain. This moment hits home for me personally, as the interaction between Senua and Dillion is very reminiscent of a depressive episode, and as anyone who's suffered from mental illness knows, once you start spiraling, it's incredibly hard to pull yourself out, and kind words from your support system sometimes just aren't enough. I know I've had times myself where I break down and my partner tries to console me, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's nice to see this from Senua's perspective, because people don't realize how hard it is for the person suffering to pull themselves out of their pain. It's not a switch you can flip, it's different for everybody, but it can be hard. So hard. The third trial is a dimension-hopping tower puzzle, where you switch between a light and dark world to make your way through the tower and over to Dillion. I've already mentioned that I love this style of gameplay, and I have nothing but positives to say, especially with how the voices in Senua's head react to the 2 different worlds, really selling how comfortable the light world is versus the terror of the dark world. Completing this task awards the player and Senua with a memory of Dillion trying to uplift Senua by reframing her flaws in a positive manner. It's a short but sweet moment that shows just how much of a positive force Dillion was in her life, further emphasized by the 4th and final trial, the blindness trial. In this, Senua is blind and is forced to use her senses to guide herself forwards. Standing still, she can focus and see the world around her, she can hear sounds and use them to make her way, and she is guided the whole time by Dillion's voice. This is also the most terrifying segment of the game, as once you reach this house, you drop in to see this monstrous creature ahead of you. It cannot see Senua, but it can hear her. So you have to sneak past, making sure not to rattle any chains, and look, I don't know about you, but I was holding my breath the whole time. Luckily, once you're outside, you're safe to progress and oh f***ing hell. This outside segment is the most terrifying part of the game by far. One false move, and you're dead. It was tense, slow going, and bloody petrifying. But making it through, we find a house with a well, and drop down to Nope, I'm done, no more, no. Bye, adios. Remember the sewer segment in the dark in Outlast 1? This is that segment now. Feel old yet? One final terrifying segment that had me on the edge of my seat before you finally escape and find Dillion. I still have no idea what those creatures were, but I don't really want to know. I just want to forget they even existed, por favor. Completing this trial earned you a memory of Senua being brought back from her darkness by Dillion's words, proving how vital he was as her support system, being the one person who could keep her fears at bay. We all need a partner like Dillion. With the 4 trials complete, we are able to obtain Grammar. The god-slaying sword makes Senua's abilities more powerful, allowing her to charge her heavy attacks to slash with godlike force. This can also dispel shadows, which otherwise would have required her focus to remove. It's an extreme power-up that makes Senua feel so empowered for the rest of her trials. However, upon claiming the sword, there's a rather harrowing sequence that follows that, honestly, I don't want to spoil. I think you should experience it yourselves, so I won't be showing any footage. But it does culminate in a cutscene where Dillion has to talk Senua back from, well, the implication is she wants to take her own life. He really was, at that point, her reason to live, and given her past, yeah, I kinda get it. Completing the 4 trials starts the third and final act of the game, where Senua delves into the mountain of Helheim to confront Hela once and for all. The main gimmick of Helheim is that Senua must always stay in the light, as once she steps into the shadow, she is pursued by the guardian of the Norse underworld, Fenrir. So Senua must make her way to various light sources, lighting torches, and completing the puzzles to survive. It leads to a lot of tense moments when a light source is particularly far away, and you don't know if you have enough strength to make it, and everything is flashing red, and the whole time you're just solving puzzles, but you can hear the beast in your mind whispering in your ears. Subscribe. Eventually, after solving a rune puzzle, you race across a bridge but fall, losing grip of Dillion's soul, and you're forced to scale down into Fenrir's lair to retrieve it. This culminates in a boss fight against the beast, and you already know my thoughts on combat, but at least with Grammar on your side, you're able to do significant damage. Fenrir's battle is like every other combat battle, except at a certain point he'll plunge the arena into darkness, forcing Senua to either use focus or face her fears and charge the beast to dispel it. Defeating him, though, allows Senua access to the main sanctum of Helheim, where after quickly fixing the main bridge, she is finally able to access Hela. I skipped past the gameplay of the last level, as it's basically everything you've seen up to this point, but once you reach the final door and enter Hela's sanctum, you're faced with this, a rune mirror. Stepping through will banish Senua's voices to the other side, allowing her to face her fears unfettered. You may also notice a few red runes in the cutscene I'm showing. These correspond to various rune rocks I missed during my playthrough. If you collect all 44 rune rocks and hear all of Druf's stories, extra dialogue from Druf will play, implying that Senua's father sent the Northmen to Senua's village, meaning Senua's dad is the reason for Dillion's death. And as you enter Hell and face down Hela taking on her servants, everything is revealed to you. Senua's father is revealed to be, well, a madman whose delusions were passed on to his wife and daughter, burning his wife at the stake. Senua, who saw this as a child, repressed the memory, and now she knows the truth. The darkness was her father all along, and after overcoming 2 battles with Hela's servants, including a fun rematch against the game's 3 main bosses, Surtur, Valravn, and Fenrir, we reach Hela, who shrinks to the size of a normal person. But we cannot win this fight, being struck down by her vassals. Hela picks up our sword, and we see Senua go through the 5 stages of grief.
If you're alive, and there's no darkness, then you never took him from me, did you? Is that what you want me to believe? After all you've done to me, and to him? I'll give you my life. That's what you want, isn't it? My soul. But if you won't, you will have to kill me. Because I've got nothing left. And you will have no power over me.
As Hela grants Senua's wish and stabs her, she hears Dillion one more time. Whether it's a memory or a delusion of her own making, I don't know, but it allows her to accept the darkness, accept death, and cast it aside. Hela then drops Dillion's skull into the pit of Helheim, but it pans up to reveal Senua still standing and Hela in the place of Senua's corpse. This shouldn't come as a shock to the player at this point, but if you haven't picked up on it already, all of this is happening in Senua's head. All the Norse gods just creations based on Druf's stories, a fantasy, a chance to save Dillion, a coping mechanism. What's clear is whether the people she fought along the way were real or not. My interpretation is that the Vikings she thought were real, but instead of being these undead warriors, they're just actual Vikings. She would have a reason to kill them, given they absolutely decimated her home, and her survival for a year in the wild does allow her to, well, survive. For the main bosses, I'm less sure. Surtur and Valravn could be clan leaders, while Fenrir could just be like a giant boar or a bear. So ultimately, it's a mixture of both real enemies and spiritual enemies in her mind, but I don't doubt that she really did go on this journey. Ultimately though, Senua learns to accept Dillion's death and move on with her life to something new, just like Dillion would have wanted. And we know something new is around the corner, as Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga is in development. Perhaps we'll get more of an answer to our questions there, I don't know, but I am certainly intrigued. What a game! Hellblade was a massive surprise that I didn't expect to be as good as it was from a narrative perspective. It tells a story that could only be told in the medium of gaming, and uses all the tools to create a truly compelling experience. Melina Juergens was fantastic as Senua, an absolutely stunning performance from start to finish. But this game does have a few technical flaws I would like to quickly touch upon. On the PC version, there were pop-in textures, like when you reload the game, or when loading new levels, like with the 4 trials. The subtitles, while somewhat helpful, were often mistimed, and I noticed a few mistakes in terms of dialogue here and there. Not to mention the game opens up with an options menu for accessibility, including a subtitles menu, yet the subtitles aren't on by default when you start a new game. Just a bit of a weird choice. I do appreciate the various accessibility options on offer though, more games really need to think about that. There were also a few moments where the camera clipped briefly through the world. Not a terrible issue, as this isn't a AAA game, but something worth noting. Hopefully that won't be an issue in the sequel, given they now have Xbox's backing. Frame rate also wasn't perfectly smooth, but as said, it really didn't ruin my experience at all. With that being said, I recommend Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. It's honestly one of my favorite games I've played in quite some time. It just hits a lot of points I personally enjoy, and I'm glad I got around to experiencing it after all this time. Thank you, Game Pass. Looking forward to the sequel. Thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All my social links are on screen now. You can find them in the link tree down in the description. A special shout out to all my current patrons on Patreon. You keep this channel alive. Without you guys, well, there'd be no videos. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye bye.